taxi driver. He drove so goddamn fast. Never did.
Les Claypool is one of the most distinctive and unconventional bass players in the history of rock music. Born Leslie Edward Claypool on September 1963 in Richmond, California, he grew up in a working-class family and was surrounded by the culture of the Bay Area. Unlike many bassists who followed traditional paths, Claypool carved his own direction by experimenting with unique techniques, odd time signatures, and quirky lyrical themes. His passion for music began in his teenage years when he picked up the bass guitar. Inspired by artists such as Geddy Lee from Rush and Chris Squire from Yes, Claypool quickly developed a style that was more percussive and eccentric than most. He incorporated slap techniques, tapping, flamenco-inspired strumming, and unusual rhythmic patterns, all of which would later define his career. From a young age, he developed a fascination with the bass guitar, not as a background instrument, but as a tool to lead, distort, and redefine what music could sound like. Inspired by funk masters like Larry Graham and the adventurous spirit of Frank Zappa, Claypool began experimenting with unconventional playing techniques, including slapping, tapping, and intricate rhythmic patterns that would eventually become his trademark. In the early 1980s, Claypool started forming bands with friends, but it wasn't until 1984 that the seeds of Primus were planted. The lineup went through several changes, but by the late 1980s, Claypool had recruited guitarist Larry Lalonde, a former member of death metal pioneer Possessed, and drummer Tim Herb Alexander. This trio would establish the core of Primus's sound, a bizarre genre-defying blend of funk, rock, metal, and absurdist humor. Claypool himself described it best with the phrase, "We're not metal, we're not funk, we're not alternative, we're Primus." The band's rise was unconventional. Their self-released live album Suck on This in 1989 captured their raw energy and quirky personality, immediately attracting a cult following. Their first studio album Frizzle Fry in 1990 further showcased Claypool's bass-heavy songwriting, filled with surreal lyrics and off-kilter grooves. By the time Sailing the Seas of Cheese was released, Primus had broken into the mainstream, thanks in large part to MTV exposure and the success of songs like Airy Was a Race Car Driver. Claypool's cartoonish vocal delivery, combined with his complex bass lines, made Primus stand out in an era dominated by grunge. Despite being surrounded by massive acts like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Metallica, Claypool never felt the need to compete directly with them. In fact, his friendship with Metallica goes back decades. He famously auditioned for the band in 1986 after Cliff Burton's death, but was deemed too good and too weird for their sound. Instead of chasing trends, Claypool doubled down on eccentricity, guiding Primus through a string of albums in the 1990s that cemented their reputation as one of rock's strangest yet most respected acts. Records like Pork Soda and Tales from the Punch Bowl produced oddball hits, including My Name is Mud and Winona's Big Brown Beaver, which found surprising success on both radio and MTV. Primus's influence extended beyond music. Claypool's work on the theme song for South Park in 1997 introduced the band's quirky style to a wider audience, further solidifying his status as a cultural outlier. Unlike many of his peers, Claypool never watered down his vision for commercial gain. His bass playing remained at the center, often leading the music rather than providing background support, a radical approach that inspired generations of bassists. By the late 1990s, Primus had become an iconic band, known as much for their musical weirdness as for their devoted fan base. Claypool continued exploring side projects, collaborating with artists across genres, but Primus remained his most defining creation. The band's success proved that originality, no matter how bizarre, could resonate deeply with audiences if pursued with authenticity. Les Claypool's journey with Primus is ultimately a testament to the power of staying true to one's artistic identity. Through odd humor, relentless experimentation, and unparalleled bass wizardry, he transformed a small Bay Area project into a band that carved its own lane in rock history. One of the earliest dark moments in Claypool's career came before fame ever touched him. In the mid-1980s, he auditioned to replace Cliff Burton in Metallica after Burton's tragic death. Claypool, armed with his slap-heavy, unconventional bass style, entered the room with his signature eccentricity. Instead of being embraced, he was rejected. James Hetfield famously told him he was too good and too different from Metallica. For Claypool, this wasn't simply a missed opportunity, it was a harsh reminder of how his originality often alienated him from mainstream acceptance. That rejection haunted him for years, though it also fueled his determination to carve his own identity outside traditional paths. Another shadow in Claypool's life has been his constant battle with being misunderstood. Primus's music, described as psychedelic polka, or funk metal gone wrong, never fit neatly into categories. While fans adored his bizarre humor and experimental approach, critics often dismissed him as a novelty act. This lack of recognition weighed on Claypool, who poured immense effort into his art. To be labeled as a joke band by some publications felt like a dismissal of his serious musicianship. Such misinterpretations created a sense of artistic isolation, leaving Claypool torn between his commitment to weirdness and his desire for genuine respect. Outside of the public eye, Claypool also wrestled with the heavy demands of fame. As Primus gained popularity in the early 1990s with albums like Sailing the Seas of Cheese and Pork Soda, the pressures of constant touring, fan expectations, and industry politics took a toll. Claypool has spoken about the darker mental states that emerged during these years, particularly around the making of Pork Soda, an album steeped in bleak themes of death, addiction, and despair. Written during a turbulent time, the record reflects Claypool's struggles with mortality and the darker sides of human behavior, revealing a more somber layer beneath his playful exterior. Moreover, Claypool faced personal health challenges. Years of relentless performing and physical strain on his hands and back left him dealing with chronic pain. For a bassist whose style depends on aggressive slapping and intricate fingerwork, this was not only physically draining but also emotionally devastating. The fear of losing his ability to perform at full capacity haunted him, reminding him of the fragility of the body behind the music. Despite these dark periods, Claypool never succumbed entirely to despair. Instead, he channeled his struggles into his creativity, transforming pain, rejection, and misunderstanding into art that resonated with those who also felt like outsiders. His story is not just about eccentric triumphs, but also about enduring the weight of darkness and turning it into something profoundly original.